really glad that you're with us for this start of this series, Relational Wreckage. How many of you, just show of hands, how many of you have experienced a few relationship wrecks before? Yeah, you kind of been through there. Don't point at the person next to you. Again, that is not nice. When you look at wrecks are usually caused by two things: bad decisions and dangerous behaviors, right? You pull out at the intersection at the wrong time, make a bad decision, boom, you get hit, right? There's a wreck. Or maybe you got some dangerous behaviors going on. You like to speed a little bit, or you like to text and send emails behind the wheel, that kind of person, right? And then all of a sudden that behavior is going to catch up with you, because all of a sudden you're kind of doing this, and then you plow into the car in front of you and you realize, oh man, dangerous behaviors, those cause wrecks, So in relationships, bad decisions and dangerous behaviors also cause those things to wreck as well. And in reality, that wreckage, when a relationship, two people collide and there's pain and it's bad, sometimes it takes a while to get over that. Some of that wreckage could burn for a while, and it's painful and it's hard to get over. It's hard to move on. So if relational wreckage is something that we definitely want to stay away from, the pain and the collision and all that kind of stuff that happens, how do we stay away from bad decisions and dangerous behaviors in relationships and begin to restore those relationships closest to us? Now, for this first week, we're going to start off with a bang, because I'm going to talk about marriage. And we just finished up this awesome Married Life Conference. Could we give a hand to all the folks that put on the Married Life Conference? This past weekend, I've been praying for marriages to be rebuilt, revitalized, restored, an amazing time. But I think no matter how long you've been married, whether 1 week, 10 years, 50 years, whatever it is, we all could still use a little help. I don't know anyone who's married who's like, yeah, I got this, okay? Nobody, usually if they say that, then all of a sudden they're kind of not married a little bit later, right? So we all could use a little help. Marriage is great, but it's an insanely hard challenge. It's one of the most difficult things you'll ever do in your life, but it's also one of the most rewarding experiences you can have in life. And I know for some of you, you're like, oh, Pastor Matt, I'm not married. So I guess I'm just going to sit here for the next few minutes, kind of check my email, maybe play an app. I got that new app I got. No, don't do that, because here's the deal. This message still applies to your relationships. And if you don't tune out, if you listen in, I believe that God has something for everybody, single or married, that I believe he wants to tell you. The truth is, when you're married, you're going to do some of the hardest things you'll ever do in your life. You're going to probably buy a house together. You're going to move several times. You're going to have kids. You got to raise those kids. You got to pay bills. You got to pay for college, all those kind of things. But none of those compete with the ultimate challenge in marriage: getting along with your spouse. That is the ultimate challenge. Because being around the same person for long periods of time is eventually going to cause your spouse to go from always on my mind to always on my nerves. And here's the deal. I know that some of you don't think that's ever going to happen to you. I know some newly married couples, and they're like, oh, Matt, no, that's not us. We know couples like that, but we're never going to fight. There's only one way to accomplish that. Don't live in the same house. Because you cannot have closeness without conflict sometimes. Eventually, there's going to be that moment where you look at your spouse and you say, look at us now. Look at us, baby. We're still trying to work it out. We never get it right. We must be fools. We must be crazy. When there's no communication. It's a no-win situation. See, how can we be lovers if we can't be friends? How can we start over when the fighting never ends? Baby, how can we make love if we can't make amends? Tell me, how can we be lovers if we can't be? We can't be friends. Someday you're going to say that to your spouse. Thank you, Mike Gibalisco, or Mike Bolton, whatever you want to say. Hey, Michael Bolton over there. Some of you are like, what just happened? You may not say it to your spouse exactly like Michael Bolton would say it, but you are going to say it like, what's happening to us? Those kind of moments happen. The roughest parts of marriage are when you are not getting along. And I hear couples tell me this sometimes. Well, we never fight. We never have conflict. There's a fix for that. Spend more time with each other. It will happen. Listen, I had a roommate in college who I never had a conflict with because we were never home. We never saw each other, and we got along awesome. In fact, one time, I remember I was watching TV, and I was legitimately startled when he came in the room because I literally forgot that he lived there. We got along awesome. And the thing is, if you don't want conflict in your marriage, it's really easy. Just don't spend lots of time with that person. But if you're going to be around the same person for long periods of time, there's going to be conflict because in a marriage, you're committed to each other. You're living with this person. You're working through problems together. You're going to have disagreements about money. You're going to have differences of opinion about how to say differences of opinion. No, you're going to have differences of opinion about sex. You're going to have like some real strong conversations about in-laws. Okay. Things can get heated, but they don't have to be out of control. Things getting heated, that's okay, but they don't have to get out of control. If conflict is inevitable because we're two people who are spending a lot of time together, how do you keep conflict constructive instead of destructive? Think about this. I mean, again, a fire that is contained and controlled can serve a purpose, but when a fire goes out of control, it destroys everything around it. So how do we keep conflict from becoming destructive and turn it into something constructive? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a Bible passage in the book of Colossians that I believe is going to give some great direction for this. But before we do that, before we get into that passage, I really want to set the stage for this passage. Because I think that before we go into the antidote, we really need to understand the poison and what it does. So I want to look at 3 catalysts of conflict in marriage. 3 things that cause fights, 3 things that we need to identify because these are typically when conflicts go from controlled and contained to out of control. And the first is just simply this: annoyances. Annoyances. Oh, we don't have that. Shut up. Everybody has this. This is low-level stuff. Okay, this is stuff where, why didn't you take out the trash? Why didn't you go pick up that thing I need you to go pick up? Why can't anyone replace the toilet paper? That kind of stuff. Or maybe in a conversation, it gets in this whole thing of, did you just roll your eyes at me? Why do you always say that? Why do you always walk off when this gets to this part? Those kind of things. It's kind of annoyances. While I was preparing for this message, I called my wife, Carrie, and I said, hey, Carrie, what are some things that I do that get on your nerves? And about an hour later, I said, okay, well, let's boil this down to like a top 3. That's a lot of information. So the top 3 annoyances that she told me that I do, number 1 is the empty gas tank. So sometimes, and I'm telling you, this makes people mad when I even mention this, sometimes I've left the car low on gas, and she gets in there and she's got to go fill it up, and that's really annoying. I know a lot of wives are like, I don't like Pastor Matt anymore. No, I got you. I know, that's bad. And I don't even pay attention to it. Like, I don't even look at the light, and all of a sudden I'm like, when? And I get this call from a gas station. Do you know where I am right now? No. The other one is kind of funny to me, slow cleaner. I'm a slow cleaner. This is what this means. This is so stupid. I can't believe I'm talking about this. Anyway, so we have 4 kids. Obviously, I help out in cleaning and stuff like that. And the thing is, it's just a way that I do it drives her crazy because something that takes her like 10 minutes takes me like several hours because I'll get all the cleaners out and be like, okay, we're going to start here. Do we have Brillo pads? She's like, just clean it. It's like, I'm just kind of slow about it, right? So, and then the third thing is snoring. Yeah. So I used to snore horribly, but okay, I fixed this one. I went to the trouble, I went to the clinic, I went and got the CPAP machine, got all hooked up, and now I sleep looking like this guy. That's what I look like now. Every night. So this is what marriage looks like, folks. Anyway, so So I'm just being real. I'm just sharing with you. Okay? I'm just sharing. Look, I'm a sinner just like you. Okay, this is how this works. And so annoyances are those small things that can blow up into big fights, though. They really can. You'll get in some big fights and be like, how did this start? And it's always over dumb things, right? Now let's take it up a notch. The second one that's the catalyst of conflict is just anger. And this is a higher level than annoyances, no doubt. This is when we get offended, deeply hurt. We really start to deep down resent each other. Anger is, the way I describe it, is like a campfire. It can get hot, but as long as it's contained, you're fine. But if that thing spreads out, you're going to burn the woods down. And the thing is, you have to stay on top of anger. Because if you don't, it's okay for things to get heated, but you got to keep it contained or somebody's going to get burned. And that's the problem is sometimes we let that anger spread out, we let some serious damage happen. All because we just decide, I am not staying on top of this. I'm going to fully express myself. If I go to jail, I go to jail. Kind of thing, and that's what happens. And we let that anger out. And some really serious stuff happens. Distance between the two of you becomes a real thing, a felt distance. Feelings of depression set in. When you think about your marriage, you get depressed. Criticism becomes a way to show contempt instead of concern. It's like things that we used to do to help each other, now we use to hurt each other. Trust begins to break down. There's no empathy between the two of you. Anger is that flame that has burned a lot of marriages down to the ground because we never stayed on top of it and we let it burn down the woods. The last one is not necessarily something that goes on between the two of you. It more has to do with things that happen directly to you. And the third one is anxiety. Anxiety is a big catalyst of conflict. Anxiety hits a marriage when circumstances become difficult. Money is tight, someone loses a job, kids are having a hard time at school, there's some really bad news that we're dealing with, there's a bad diagnosis. Things happen that we never saw coming, we didn't expect it, and we're reeling a little bit, and we don't know how to deal with it. Anxiety causes all kinds of things to happen: worry, lack of sleep. You start lashing out at each other because you're both anxious and you kind of look at each other and you have that insecurity. There's that irritability. There's that sadness, those things that start to kick in. And and it's a weird scenario because in this situation, two people that really need each other start to attack each other because of things that are actually happening to us as a couple. Remember when I said that wrecks are usually caused by bad decisions and dangerous behaviors? I believe that annoyances, anger, and anxiety are the roots of some of those bad decisions and some of those dangerous behaviors that happen that wreck marriages. So the question is simply this: is there hope? Is there hope when you look at all these things that you're up against? Is there hope? And the answer is absolutely. And so I want to look at Colossians chapter 3 here. In Colossians, I think we're going to find out what we can do to prevent another wreck. And here's what it says: since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts. For as members of one body, you are called to live in peace and always be thankful. Now, you kind of read through this and think, okay, what does that have to do with it? Like, I get some of this, but maybe I don't get all this. This passage is telling us to clothe ourselves, to put on mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, and the most important piece, love. And it says that if we do that, if we put those things on, if we clothe ourselves with those things, then what happens is that we are bound together, we live in peace, there's a unity that happens. Now, clothing is something that you choose to put on. I mean, some of you are like, wow, I'm so glad I drove to hear that. But in all reality, it's true. If you're going to work, the store, whatever, like let's say I'm going to the office. If I'm going to the office, I'm going to put on slacks, a nice shirt, maybe a tie, depending on what your job requires. If I'm gonna go to Target, right, I'm gonna put on jeans and a shirt. I'm not just gonna show up there in my PJs, right? I'm gonna put on something different. And the thing is that, some places, and I'm not gonna name names, but it rhymes with Walmart. Some places you'll sometimes see people whose clothes do not seem to indicate an awareness that they are in a public setting. I don't think they knew, hey, before we go to the store, some clothes would need to be put on, kind of thing. Not the right clothes, perhaps the lack thereof. I don't know what you're ever going to call that. There's just some places that you can't even go in unless you have the right clothes. Some restaurants require a tie, nice dresses, those kind of things. Some gas stations even require, hey, no shirt, no shoes, no service, right? That's just basic stuff. And here's the deal. If I'm going somewhere, I need to put on the right clothes. And here's the deal. If I'm going to be in my marriage today, which I am because I'm married, I need to make sure that I put on the right clothes. And what I mean is I need to put on love for my spouse today. All that stuff about mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, I don't wake up with those things. I don't know if you do, but I don't. I don't always wake up like, I'm so merciful right now. I don't. And the thing is that, most of the time you don't wake up with your clothes on. That's kind of weird, right? But the thing is that I have to put them on, and I have to say, Lord, help me have this heart and this attitude toward my spouse today. And what I'm telling you is simply this: a successful marriage requires a daily decision to have the right heart and attitude toward your spouse. It is a daily decision you make every day to put on the right heart, to put on the right attitude. This is the thing, fellas, I just want to say this to you. If some of you would put your spiritual clothes on, you might spend more time with your... Never mind, I'm not going to go there. Some of you didn't connect it, you'll get it later. But here's the thing. The truth is this: let me look at this. How can taking the right heart and attitude intentionally prevent nasty conflicts and those things that we talked about earlier? Well, let me show you how this breaks down. Let's look at the first callous annoyances, right? If you're annoyed with your spouse, then take a look at verse 13. Let's go back to that. It just says, make allowance for each other's faults. Now, here's the deal. If I'm putting on spiritual clothes, meaning I'm giving my attitude, my heart to God, what's going to happen is I'm going to become more aware of my faults, and I'm going to start to make a little bit more room for my spouses. For instance, if I realize how much grace that I need today, I'm going to show my spouse a little bit more grace. If I realize how much patience I need today, I'm going to be a little bit more patient with my spouse. And whether you're single or married, everyone can do this, and this is just a prayer to do this. Here it is. God, help me be more aware of my faults and less annoyed by the faults of others. Make allowance for others' faults. And the only way that we make room for that is when we recognize how much room we take up. That's just not something you can do on your own, folks. I don't wake up every day going, man, I'm just going to be more aware of what I'm doing and less annoyed by other people. No, I need God to correct that in me every day. I need to actually take that on every day and live that out. Now let's take a look at this one, anger. If you're angry at your spouse, maybe we're up a level here, then just keep reading the rest of verse 13. It says, forgive anyone who offends you. Remember that the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Here's the truth. We do not have the ability to forget when we've been wounded. That's true. Anyone who tells you, just try to forget about it, that's not going to happen. But we have the ability to forgive wounds. We have the ability to let certain people go even though they've done us wrong. Here's the thing. When you are wounded, you have to keep the wound clean in order for it to heal. If you don't keep the wound clean, it gets infected. And when it comes to emotional wounds, you have to keep your heart towards your spouse clean, which means I've got to forgive you, because if you don't and you let that stuff build up in your heart, it gets infected. Bitterness, resentment, all kinds of nasty things start to swim around in there. But the truth is, if I can forgive, if I can let go, if I can just say, listen, I'm not going to keep bitterness towards you, I'm not going to keep grudges towards you, God's forgiven me, I've got to get to the point where I can forgive you. I'm not saying it's an instant thing, okay? I'm not saying you just snap your fingers and do it. It's a process. But in the truth, we need to give our frustration to God, and you need to give your spouse forgiveness. Because here's what we do. We do the opposite, because the problem is we throw our frustrations at our spouse. They can't do anything about that. And all that does is that builds the beast of resentment in us. So the truth is this: God, help me give my frustrations to you and give my forgiveness to others. Because God is the only one that can do anything with your frustrations. Because God can renew your heart. God can take pain and do things with it. Your spouse cannot. And the thing is that this relationship that we have is never going to heal if I don't have forgiveness in it. That's free. But the truth is, it cannot go forward. We can't move on until we're finally able to forgive each other and have a clean heart toward each other so that we can heal and get that infection out. Your spouse may not deserve your forgiveness. Most people don't, that we have to forgive. But the relationship, let me repeat that, it cannot heal without forgiveness. God can give you freedom from anger and give you forgiveness, which will bring healing to your marriage. Now, maybe it's not annoyances or anger that's the problem for you. And again, I'm going through several ones of these because I don't know what's going on in your marriage. Maybe there's just one of these that you need to kind of really think through. Maybe anxiety is something that's plaguing your marriage right now. Take a look at verse 15. It says, "And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts." Anxiety and peace are complete opposites. When life hits hard and more viciously than we ever expected, anxiety really sets in. And what it does is it grows from a concerning thought to a consuming thought. All kinds of emotions kick in: panic, fear, self-preservation. And what happens is anxiety is a quick ruler. And what I mean is it will put itself on the throne of how you think and start to govern your thoughts. Everything that you experience now comes through the filter of that anxiety. It literally, as the Bible says here, it can rule your heart. And if it sits on the throne, what happens is that all your responses, all your feelings, every way that you go about your relationships is now governed by anxiety. The truth is, every day we face a decision on what sits on the throne of your heart. You may not understand the things that are happening to you, and you may even fear what happens next. You have no idea where things are headed. But I'm telling you that in any circumstance, no matter what's happening, God can give you peace. He may not give you understanding, but He may give you peace. An ability to look at what's happening and say that even though this is out of control, I have to remember who is in control. You know that you've never been in control, right? That's all an illusion. God is the only one in control. And you have every reason to be anxious, but you also have every reason to have freedom from anxiety if you look to your faith instead of your fear. So the other prayer I would tell you to pray is this: God, help my faith in you, not my fears, govern my thoughts. Let the reality of who you are and the control that you are in and the throne that you sit in, let that govern my thoughts, not this little anxiety that's sitting inside of my heart that's making me miserable. You got to choose to kick fear off of the throne and put God back on it. That's a daily decision sometimes when you're right there in the trench. We choose His peace to rule our hearts. Now, let's say that you're not a believer, right? You're hearing all this stuff. I'm talking about marriage. Maybe you're here, I don't know, for whatever reason, somebody invited you, and you're not even sure there's a God at all, and you're not even sure that prayer will even make a difference in your marriage. But let me just ask you this. Would your marriage benefit from more self-awareness, forgiveness, and peace? Would your marriage benefit from those things? And what I'm going to ask you to do is maybe if you're not a Christian, you're not a believer, just for 1 week, put your doubts aside and ask God to help you have the right heart and attitude toward your spouse. Literally come to pray to God. Just say, God, help me have this every day, just for this week. You may be surprised at what happens. You know, we've gone through a lot of stuff. But the truth is this is just what I want you to know. It's just if you want a great marriage, you need God's help. You cannot do so much of this on your own. We don't wake up thinking like this. We don't wake up acting like this. As a Christian, as a person who has the Holy Spirit in you, we have to wake up every day and put on those things that we know that we have to do toward our spouse. You cannot do it as your own. We all hear these divorce statistics all the time that, oh, well, here's how many people who aren't Christians get divorced. Here's how many who are Christians. I'm not surprised that they're high because the truth is you can't do this on your own. And I believe there's a lot of well-meaning Christians out there who try to still do it on their own. They don't ask for God's help in reorienting their heart and their attitude toward their spouse. They just go, well, I'm just going to wing it. And winging it doesn't work. It's just too much of a challenge. For some of you, as I've talked about some of these things, as I've talked about, self-awareness, forgiveness, peace, those kind of things, asking for God's help in your marriage, some of you may need to do some of these marriage groups that we're talking about in our bulletin. The truth is, maybe it's time to stop acting like counseling is for everybody else but you. And maybe it's not a bad idea to go, maybe we do need to see a counselor. That's not a bad thing. That's not a last resort. That's a preventative thing. And the truth is, maybe you need to join a group. Maybe you need to go to counseling. And here's the thing. I want to encourage everybody who's married to do one thing. Make a daily decision for God to control your heart and attitude toward your spouse, to give that to him. But make a decision together to decide that maybe we want to, how can we get some encouragement and some wisdom into our marriage? What do we need to do? Do we need to do a group? What do we need to do together to make sure that we don't fall into some of these traps? Because when annoyances, anger, and anxiety creep in, they will shape how you view your spouse. And if you keep looking through those darkened lenses, it will be game over. But at some point, we have to realize there is a decision every single day, no matter what has happened. There's a decision every day for us to ask God, to say, God, shape how I see my spouse today. Help me to have the right heart. Help me to have the right attitude. I put on self-awareness. I put on forgiveness. I put on your peace because I don't wake up with things like humility and kindness and gentleness and stuff like that. God help us. Because if we will ask God to strengthen us, he's not only going to strengthen you, but he's going to strengthen your marriage as well. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our campus pastor so they can close the service.